Hi everyone and welcome back to the Smith of Kitava Totem build. This is sort of like an update video where I cover what has changed since my part 1. I did make a few tweaks mainly for optimization as I'm now currently at level 94. If you want more like a part 1 video to see how to set this up and what to look for in gear and how to progress your passive tree and all that, please look at the link in the video description, which will take you to the more appropriate part 1 video. Needless to say, this build is pretty tanky. This is here a showcase, so this map has burning ground. I'm now standing in burning ground and I'm getting shot from every single direction, and my HP isn't really going down. Or rather, it is going down, but the life regeneration is faster than the damage loss that I take. In this video, I wanted to also showcase a tier 4 Arbiter, so I had to farm a few Citadel keys. So I decided to take this as one of the snapshots as I warm up for the tier 4 Arbiter Fight. You can see how quickly the rolling stem totems melt the boss. I've already completed phase 1 and I actually have to wait a longer time for him to transition to phase 2.
I will succeed.
Phase 2 didn't take that long as well, and in fact if you wanted to, you could just stand in front of the boss as your totems do their work. And anyway, boss is dead. So here it is, tier 4 Arbiter on my Atlas tree as I head into battle. This is all in one video.
The fourth edict already burns for your...
I have to say, this is actually the first time I've built Arbiter up to T4 difficulty and fought him. I haven't actually done this on other characters before, and I didn't even look at the guide, and it was a learning curve. Not going to lie, I did die the first few times. The fire attacks here, and later on when the ember falls from the sky, I don't know what you call that, will one-shot you, and I learned that the painful way. But as soon as you get the hang of it, it isn't too bad, and the totems do fairly nice damage on the Arbiter. In one or two of the fights, they actually did bring Arbiter down to quarter health before this phase starts, but unfortunately I died in those fights because I didn't know that you really have to stand in a circle. I sort of got arrogant and thought that I could just stand in front of the Arbiter, but I learned my lesson, and you do not want to underestimate this fight. Beyond those one-shot mechanics though, you can see that it is fairly comfortable overall because we have excellent resistances, and as you can see here also, I'm sort of stacking the Holy Ground from my Leap Slam as well as the Font of Blood from my Orb of Storms. The life regen is fairly quick. There is no life flask used in this entire fight. All the healing that you see is from life regeneration alone.
Inconsequential. Acquiesce. The mother soul must.
Now besides tier 4 Arbiter of Xesht, the other content in the game currently that is considered one of the most difficult endgame content is of course tier 4 Simulacrum. So here's a video footage showing wave 14 and 15 of tier 4 Simulacrum. I didn't want to show the whole Simulacrum because that's 15 waves and it will be pretty lengthy. And of course the first 10 waves or so are relatively simpler. It really only gets hairy in the last 3 or so waves, where as you can see there's a lot of monsters spawning in, and on top of this there's frequently 2 or maybe, I think there's only 2 at most, but there's frequently 2 delirium bosses spawning in as well, which pack quite a lot of punch. Similar to the tier 4 Arbiter showcase that I showed, I didn't drink any flask throughout the entire challenge in the tier 4 Simulacrum. All the healing that you see is just regeneration. stacking from base region to the holy ground from the Leap Slam, which is why you see me Leap Slamming around, and also the Font of Blood from the Orb of Storms. It does get pretty hairy, such as here, because at one point the enemies unfortunately took down my totems pretty quickly, and I needed to find the spare time to plonk down new totems. This is why totem placement speed is very important. Luckily, I do have enough totem placement speed, and combine that with Leap Slam, you can actually still place down totems even at the hairiest of circumstances. So just to prove that this is tier 4 Simulacrum, I'm just going to my Atlas tree right now, and as you can see, it's tier 4 Simulacrum.
So be it.
Hi everyone, this is a build update for the Smith of Kitava totem build. In case you missed the first video where I talk about transitioning into this build and how it works, as well as a couple of showcases, I'll include links to those in the video description. This video is more of an update, so it wouldn't go very deeply into the build, but rather I will focus on what has changed since the first video. So first off, I'll talk a little bit about the defenses and how it's changed. The Smith is extremely tanky because, like I have shown previously, it has 90% across all elemental resistance, as well as of course having the Molten Symbol Ascendancy passive, which allows you to have further physical damage mitigation by rolling it against your 90% fire resistances. What's notable though is the life and the life regeneration. So since the first video, I have upgraded my gear a little bit, so I've gotten a little bit more life than before. I'm now sitting at roughly 4,500 life, but I've also invested a little bit of weapon passive points. So in case you're not aware, you have 24 weapon passive points that you can delegate to weapon set 1 and weapon set 2. Some of my weapon set 1 points have been delegated to life regeneration, and I'll cover the passive tree shortly, but I now have a resting base life regeneration of 1078 life per second, and this is just hanging out on my hideout with no buffs whatsoever. In more difficult content such as tier 4 Simulacrum and tier 4 Arbiter of Ash, for example, what I also can and have weaved in is using Leap Slam on top of Orb of Storms that has Font of Blood. These stacks, and you can see it's not very difficult to get both up. All you have to do is press Leap Slam and press Orb of Storms, and you can do that pretty easily because you have a lot of idle time when your totems are up. But the combination of both stacking with your natural base life regen, I can have up to 1781 life regen per second. So in battle, if you're getting surrounded or you're getting a lot of damage from the boss, just Leap Slam and throw out Orb of Storms, and then you'll be sitting at 1781 life per second. The effects is because Leap Slam has consecrated ground through Holy Descent. I think this is a no-brainer. Almost every build that uses Leap Slam uses this. So this is a lot of life regen, and of course Orb of Storms has the usual Font of Blood on it, so give me additional 2% life regen per second. This is pretty tanky overall. If you could just compare that to your Ultimate Life Flask, Ultimate Life Flask is 1005 over 3 seconds, so that's 500 life per second. So this is like 3.5 or maybe even close to 4 life flasks active running at the same time. In terms of gear and equipment, the basics of gear and equipment remains the same. So in case you want that in detail, again, go back to the first part of the video that I made, link in the video description, where I talk about what to look for in gear. But essentially I upgraded my pieces, my boots and my shield now has more life or strength on it than my first iteration. So I managed to get more life that way. I also upgraded my rings to be a bit more optimal in stats, and my gloves also has a little bit more in terms of strength, and it now has attack speed, which is very valuable. My gloves previously had dexterity on it, so instead I now have a different amulet that has a plus 12 dex, which is really all you need. You don't really need a lot of dex. The only thing dexterity is used for in this build is for the support gem requirement, and you can make do without some of the green support gems anyway, so dexterity is really more a nice to have stat. So since I now don't have it on my glove, I saw this selling for 15 divs and I bought it on the trade site. It has pretty much everything I wanted. The only shame is that it has the maximum mana, which is a dead stat on this build. But the rest of the stats are really nice overall, and they come at pretty nice rolls as well. That's pretty much it for the build. The weapons are pretty much, I think, similar. I think I now have strength across all my weapons. I didn't have that before, so that also contributed a little bit more to the strength and the life. So I'm now sitting at 704 strength in hideout. For the skill and support gems, it's largely the same, and there's quite a bit of skills here, but most of them, or I should say half of them, are used more for pinnacle content. When you're doing regular T15 mapping, or content that's not at the high end, so if you're not clearing tier 4 content, most of the skills that you'll be using is just the Ancestral Warrior Totem with Sunder attack, and then Lip Slam for mobility, and if you really need it, the extra heal. And then I just use Orb of Storms to swap back to weapon set number 1, and as I move around, because the cast speed is pretty quick with Orb of Storms. So when you drop totems, which switches you to your double maces, then Orb of Storms to switch you back to your shield for maximum survivability. The one thing to note about the weakness of this build is that you are a bit more vulnerable when you are placing down totems, because when you do so, you have 0% block because you are dual wielding the hammers. Block is a very important layer of defense in this build. You aren't going to be instant one-shotted or anything like that, because you still have your other layers of defense working for you. You have your resistance, and you have your life and your life regen still. But obviously without the block, you'll be taking a lot more incoming damage. So ideally what you want to do is learn to reposition yourself. Only cast the totems when you're out of range, and you can simply dodge roll away or lip slam away, and then cast totems and then quickly switch back to your shield by casting Orb of Storms. It is fairly simple and intuitive, and you get the hang of it pretty quickly, just by a little bit of practice. Now in terms of my main totem for mapping, like I said, I use Sunder, and the damage isn't terribly exciting with this. So many people have asked how can the damage be high enough if you are stacking a lot on defenses, and the answer is totems don't really need a lot. So for example, Sunder now does 60,400 damage per use on average based on the in-game tooltip. And this might not sound like a lot, but there's 3 things to consider here. The first is that on Sunder totem, I don't have a lot of damage support. So Martial Tempo, I guess, can be considered damage support because you are attacking faster, but Upheaval is actually a DPS loss. Reach is 0 DPS, it's just bigger area. And lastly, Cold Infusion is the only DPS, I guess, support that I run here, and this is a fairly recent swap in. So the damage can definitely be much higher if I wanted to, but since I use this for mapping, I am prioritizing AoE and radius of attack over damage. For it's a bit more efficient that way. In fact, if I just remove Upheaval and then I go back to look at the DPS again, it jumps to 100,000 damage. So Upheaval is a pretty big damage loss overall, but it more than makes up of it because it triples the fissures created. So you know, one totem attacking can clear like half to 3/4 of the screen. And if you can plonk down 3 totems, so just plonk down 3 totems, imagine how much AoE, you know, it's most of the time if there's a lot of enemies, by having good placement on the 3 totems, you can clear the entire screen at once, even at just doing 60,000 damage each. Which is, I guess, the second point. The 60,000 damage mentioned is per totem. So if you cast 3 of these, essentially you're doing 60,000 damage multiplied by 3 totems, which is fairly a lot, and more than enough to take down even, you know, rares and tier 15 bosses and such. So that's really good enough, which is why, you know, you don't need to invest a lot in damage. Why Cold Infusion? Well, mainly a little bit for damage. Previously I had Inspiration here, but because of changes on the passive tree, I now have a lot of spell cost reduction, so I don't need Inspiration anymore. So I decided to just put in Cold Infusion for extra damage here. It can be really any of the infusions that you want. Since I use this for mapping, I thought Cold Infusion would be best. But if you don't like it, you know, you can just use Fire or Lightning Infusion as well. And the third factor to consider is that I am wearing the Deepest Tower, and I do have a lot of passives in the tree that boost damage when enemies are on low life. So there's one cluster here, and then there's of course the Finality cluster over here, but I'll cover more into that again once I come into the passive tree. The thing to note is that the estimated damage tooltip in-game doesn't account for conditional damage. So all the juicy plus attack damage bonus when enemies are on low life isn't actually factored into the 60,000 damage here. So in practice, you know, when you're in battle while mapping, the damage is actually much higher than 60,000. And I guess if you have the path of building, you can check this out yourself, but I don't actually use that, so I can't. But you know, 60,000 is more like the floor base damage of the skill, so to speak. Now what about the other totem? So this is my bossing totem. I use this for pinnacle content. You don't really need to use this for general mapping, but I use Rolling Stem here, and because this is more for bossing, I use the opposite support gems. All 4 support gems here are damage gems, so this skill does significantly higher DPS. So the first slam itself is close to 100,000, and the second slam is about 200,000 base damage. Again, not forgetting that you can have 3 of these totems up at once, and they also don't account for low life as well. Keeping in mind that one of the damage gems here is Execute, and because I have the Deepest Tower, essentially this is 50% more damage and isn't actually factored in the in-game tooltip as well. So this totem does a lot of single target damage at the expense of AoE, whereas this totem does great AoE at the expense of damage because you don't need a lot of that for mapping. Lastly, I just threw in Resonating Shield here. You really don't need this. I really only use this as an armor breaking tool for endgame content, and there are other options. So you can use Armor Breaker, for example, which actually breaks more armor, but that's a bit more on single target. I like the fact that Resonating Shield has your shield up while you're doing it, so it's a bit more defensive, and it's also a little bit more AoE. So I have Splinter and Demolisher here, and then I have Rage, Magnified Effect, and Burgeon just to deal a bit more damage. I've been actually thinking of putting in Knockback on this because I did do some T4 Simulacrum. One of the challenges is that you get mobbed extremely quickly on the last 2 or 3 waves, so having Knockback might be helpful there. But nevertheless, that's just a min-maxing kind of thing. If you don't like Resonating Shield, you can really use Armor Breaker here to be a bit more efficient in breaking armor at the end game, which actually tremendously boosts damage that your totem does as well because it's all physical damage over here. And that's it. So the spirit buffs are just Overwhelming Presence and Time of Need. That didn't change from the first video. Now coming to the passive tree is where a lot of changes has taken place, so I'll spend a bit more time here. But essentially the core remains the same, where I'm going for weapon passives on weapon set 2, that's why these are highlighted in green. And then for the ones highlighted in red, I go for block and life regeneration. So this way there's very little wastage in points. You know, one passive point you get to maximize both offense and defense, which is why this build works pretty well. The one thing I'm not so sure whether it works is there are two nodes here, so lay siege as well as offensive stance over here. Both do the same thing, they give you 1% more damage per 1% chance to block. The question is whether or not this affects the totems, and there doesn't seem to be any conclusive answer to this, unfortunately. So if someone does know, please let me know. I'm assuming it does work, but I'm actually hoping it doesn't, which sounds strange because if it doesn't actually work, it means that I've been doing content all the while, you know, with this essentially doing nothing, and that means I could actually take this and move them somewhere else. I've been wanting to put a bit more points into life regen. I'm missing a couple of points for this, so I could make this even a bit more tanky if those passives didn't actually work. But let's see. So I'm just assuming it works, and I think I have enough life regen currently. The other big changes I made, firstly I have a from nothing diamond, and this actually doesn't go for too much. From nothing unwavering stance, I believe it was like 10 chaos or something like that, so not really too expensive, and this is more for efficiency purposes. So previously I had to spend points to path here to pick up these 3 low life passives. This is quite a lot of DPS, so the main point gives you 120% increased damage, this is 30 and this is 30, so it's 180% bonus damage when in combination with the deepest tower is always on, because deepest tower makes it so that enemies are always considered low life. So previously I had to spend 4 points to path to here, so the from nothing essentially allows me to save those 4 points and place them elsewhere. In addition, this cluster also comes into range, and this is an excellent life regeneration cluster. So you have 4 small nodes that give you 10% each, and one big one that gives you 15%. So this 15%, it says life recovery, but I've tested it and it does also count in life regeneration as well. I suppose the game considers regeneration as a form of recovery. So this is a massive pickup, and that's how I greatly increased my life regeneration versus the first video, while at the same time, as I said, saving the 4 points to get to it. So it does cost 1 jewel slot, but that's where the extra points that you save come in. But before I get into that, the other one that I got is the Megalomaniac Diamond. So the Megalomaniac Diamond, I managed to get this, which is very good. Both passives are very relevant. The first is Supportive Ancestors, which is for the totem cluster here. So in the part 1 video, I actually spent 5 points to path to here just to get to this totem cluster. And while there are some life regeneration nodes here as well, you don't need this tree because you already have access to a lot of life regeneration nodes in the main tree. So you know there isn't even enough points to get to this tree. So the only reason to spend 5 points to get to here is to get to this totem cluster. So the Megalomaniac saves you those 5 points. And on top of that, because it gives me Blade Catcher, which is normally over here. Previously I pathed down here as well to connect the tree, just so that I can pick up Blade Catcher. Technically you don't need this, but I really like it because it gives you damage against burst damage, so to speak. So crits are better defended, and you know it plays very well into the build because the main form of sustenance is your life regeneration. So you really don't want to get big spikes of damage. That's why I like this one, and of course it gives you 15 strength, which is really juicy as well. So previously I had to spend points to path to it to take it, so it's at least 3 points if you want to path from here. So it saves me 3 points here and 5 points here for a total of 8 points. So I've saved 8 points on the Megalomaniac Diamond, and I've saved 5 points from the From Nothing Unwavering Stance Diamond. The one thing you might be wondering is, isn't it a waste that you're letting go of this entire cluster except for the big notable here? Well, the only thing worth getting on this cluster is the 3 plus 16% totem damage. The other ones that are quite good are the totem placement speed, but you make up for this because the points that you save allow you to path upwards to this cluster, where previously there isn't enough points to get here. And lo and behold, this cluster also has 3 plus 16% totem damage anyway, so you aren't losing any totem damage. You lose 3 down here, you gain 3 up here, so it's a wash. The totem placement speed, you don't need that much because I now have 4 different rubies and all 4 of them has totem placement speed. So this is an example here. All my rubies have the exact same 4, so life regeneration, block chance, totem placement speed. The 4th is mixture. Some has totem damage like this, some has melee or physical damage, so this is global physical damage, and some has melee damage. They all do the same thing. All of them works on the totem. The totem damage passive can roll higher, but it's very difficult to find 4 exact passives, so the few percent I think doesn't really matter too much. Just get one of these, but the main thing is that you get the other 3 in. So with 4 rubies giving totem placement speed, you don't really need all the totem placement speed over here. Totems are pretty quick as it is. So to me, I think that's quick enough. So then with the added points that I saved, it allowed me to reach up here. Previously, it was already a struggle to reach here because I really wanted this cluster here. So this cluster is very good. It's one of the reasons why I think it's worth it to spend points just to path here, because just this 1 point gives you 30% block chance, which is really a lot. The 25% reduced global defenses don't really matter for this build because you have 0 evasion and 0 energy shield. The only thing it reduces is armor, and really with armor you really have enough overall. It changes because most of it comes from my shield. So another thing is if you are in the second weapon stance after casting your totems, you have a lot of reduction in armor, so that is why you want to try to switch back to weapon set 1 as quickly as possible. But my armor is pretty decent because this cluster also has the one on the right here, which gives you a lot of extra defense from the equipped shield. So that's why it's very important to get a shield with like 1000 armor or so. My shield now has less armor because I've taken out the iron rune and I've put in a body rune on it. So you could potentially get a few percent more armor if you swap this back to a iron rune, which is definitely an option. But in short summary, this cluster is really worth it. So if you're going to spend points to path up here, you might as well spend 3 points to come here to unlock the jewel socket. And then as I was looking around, I saw that there's another jewel socket right here, which is really perfect. So the two sockets that you had to spend to get your Megalomaniac, and from nothing you now can place them with the 2 additional sockets, so you don't have to give up the 4 rubies that I had. And on top of that, the main thing is that it allowed me to reach this cluster. I prefer this cluster over this one, because at least this cluster has the jewel sockets nearby, so that's one of the big things. But it also has attack speed as well, which I really want a lot, because one of the things, or I guess weaknesses of totems, is that they really aren't the fastest in attacking. So with this, actually I'm stacking quite a bit of attack and skill speed, which dramatically boosts DPS. So, and here I'm not losing anything because I have the notable from my Megalomaniac, and like I said, the totem damage is a wash, and totem placement speed, I have them on rubies and you don't need them anymore. So overall, I think this is a bit more efficient in passive point use. Quick pause of the video here as I'm doing my video editing. One thing I forgot to mention is that with the points saved with the Megalomaniac and from nothing, I also changed the pathing a bit to pick up Titanic over here. Previously I had Titanic anointed on my amulet, So now since I could pick up Titanic by pathing to it, I now have Deep Trance anointed on my amulet instead. Deep Trance is really good because it gives you attack speed, which is what I really want coming from my first update. And on top of that, it gives me skill cost reduction, and this is why I could take out inspiration from my Thunder Totems and instead use Cold Infusion for a little bit more damage. And currently now I'm level 94. I guess the only question is what's next, you know. I'm not sure whether I want to continue leveling to 97 and 98 with this build, but the idea is that there are quite a few notable 2-pointers here. So this is one, you can go for Devastation with just 2 points. And then here's another good one, you can go for Cruel Methods with just 2 points, which gives you a bigger break armor, which is very relevant, but also increases your physical damage. And then the other one is this one. I am considering going for this. I spent 1 point, so it's just another point here, where you get more protection against crits, which is really relevant again for this build. So which ones you want to prioritize more is really a matter of personal preference. Lately I've been thinking I should actually go for this. Breaking armor is pretty good, and the faster you break armor, the more damage that you do, and you get physical damage percent on top of this as well. So you know, in the ideal world, if I level to 97, 98, 99, I'll get 2 points here, I'll get 2 points here, and I'll get 2 points here as well. So that should round off the points. Overall, you know, that's pretty much it. The core is the same. You want to get the cluster of totem passives, but I've already mentioned this in the first video. Again, if you want to see how to progress and transition your passive tree from the mid 50s all the way to endgame, then catch the link in the video description. It has timestamps included as well.